So picture a conqueror charging across a battlefield. Um, we're usually taught that this is the person who writes history, you know?
Right, the one with the biggest sword, the largest army, the crown, all of that.
Exactly. But what if the survival of a civilization doesn't actually rely on, well, the people tearing down the borders?
Hmm.
What if the real architects of history are the quiet translators, the record keepers, and the cross-cultural wanderers who physically carry knowledge across those borders?
I mean, it is a profound shift in perspective. And as I'm looking through this stack of sources we're unpacking for you today, I'm literally mapping out these geographical connections on the paper in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are tracing a massive, completely unexpected journey that proves exactly that point.
We really are. We are taking you on a deep dive today that connects the treacherous, uncharted riverways of 17th century Brazil to the translation hubs of medieval Spain and all the way to the ancient exam halls of China.
It's quite the trip.
It is. It almost feels like the studio backdrop behind us needs to be constantly shifting, like starting in a dense Brazilian jungle canopy and slowly fading into an ancient, stone-paved cityscape.
And the through line connecting all these, seemingly disparate times and places is a concept our sources refer to as Mamelucology.
Right, Mamelucology, which it sounds highly academic, maybe a little intimidating, but the idea itself is incredibly dynamic.
Very much so.
From what I gathered in the sources, it's the study of how bicultural individuals and the deeply embedded cultural codes they carry with them
Yeah.
act as the actual living infrastructure of the world. Like they're the human bridges that preserve civilization itself.
Exactly. I mean, when we think of infrastructure, we usually think of roads and bridges made of concrete,
Yeah,
right?
physical things.
Right. But Mamelucology argues that human beings are the ultimate infrastructure. And to understand how this works in practice, well, we need to start with raw geographical expansion. We need to look at how cultural adaptation doesn't just change society, it literally alters the physical map of the world. So let's start in Brazil, with a group known as the Mamelucos, or the Bandeirantes.
Oh, I was fascinated by these guys in the notes. These were the explorers and like fortune hunters of colonial Brazil.
Yes, exactly.
But what's crucial here isn't just that they were exploring, it's their heritage. The Mamelucos were this really unique tricultural mix. You had Jewish, Moorish, and Iberian descent on one side, heavily mixed with indigenous heritage on the other.
Right, which was key.
Yeah, they weren't just Europeans stumbling blindly through a jungle they didn't understand.
And what's fascinating here is how that specific cultural synthesis was essentially their primary survival tool. It wasn't just a biological fact, it was a tactical advantage.
How so?
Well, you mentioned Europeans stumbling through the jungle. A purely European expedition would have starved or gotten lost or just succumbed to the environment. But the Mamelucos adapted the local indigenous languages, specifically Tupi and Guarani.
Because if you don't have a language, you don't have the landscape. Right?
Precisely. Language in that environment is a physical tool. Like it tells you which plants are toxic, which rival groups control which territories, and how to navigate the seasonal floods.
Wow, yeah.
Without that linguistic key, they would have been locked out completely. But because they could communicate and because they understood the physical layout of the land around the São Paulo Plateau through their indigenous mother's lineage, they unlocked a geographic anomaly that changed global history.
The Taitei River. I actually had to look this up on a map because it didn't make sense to me at first.
It's very counterintuitive.
It is, because most rivers along that Brazilian coastline flow east, emptying right out into the Atlantic Ocean. But the Taitei River uniquely flows west. It flows completely inland.
Yeah, it is a natural reverse highway into the dark interior of the continent. And because these Mamelucos had the hybrid knowledge to recognize and navigate this specific river, they were able to push deep into the Amazon basin and eventually into the areas that are now Bolivia and Peru, which completely upended the geopolitical map of the era. Like, if I remember correctly, the major powers had essentially drawn a line down the map, splitting the New World between Spain and Portugal.
Yes, the Treaty of Tordesillas.
Right. But the Bandeirantes, using this inland river and their indigenous survival skills, massively expanded the Portuguese holdings way past that treaty line.
Way past it, yeah.
And in doing so, they stumbled onto something that would literally rebuild a European capital.
They found the Great Gold Strike. In a place called Villarica, which is present-day Aro Preto in the state of Minas Gerais, they discovered an astronomical amount of gold.
Astronomicals, right?
Yeah, to put it into perspective, the official known amount of gold pulled from those deposits was around 800 tons.
800 tons. That is staggering.
It is. And that wealth didn't just sit in Brazil. That gold flowed directly back across the Atlantic. So in 1755, a catastrophic earthquake leveled the city of Lisbon in Portugal.
Oh, I've heard about that. Yeah, it was one of the most devastating natural disasters in European history. But because of the gold found by the Bandeirantes, a statesman known as the Marquis of Pombal had the limitless capital required to completely rebuild Lisbon from the rubble.
Wow. So the indigenous knowledge of a river in South America literally funds the resurrection of a European capital.
Exact.
But wait, because there was a detail in the sources that I absolutely loved. That 800 tons, that was just the official ledger.
Ah, yes, the contraband.
Yes, there was a massive contraband economy happening right under the nose of the Portuguese crown. I read estimates that there was likely another 800 tons of gold that was smuggled out to avoid royal taxes.
Which is just wild to think about.
And the way they hid it is brilliant. They used these objects called Santos do Pau Oco.
The hollow carved wooden saint statues.
Yes, they would take these beautiful religious statues, carve out the insides, and stuff them to the brim with gold dust. Then they would just slip right past the fiscal checkpoints.
It's quite clever.
It's like a theological smuggling compartment. Like, they used extreme religious reverence to completely cloak a highly lucrative illegal commerce. The saints themselves were the mules.
It really is a perfect encapsulation of how layered this expansion was. Sacred on the outside, ruthlessly economic on the inside.
Yeah.
But as we look at this massive wealth generation, we do have to follow the natural progression of history. The pursuit of that wealth inevitably leads us to the human errors and the deeply dark consequences of this era.
Right, because we can't talk about this history just as a fun adventure about gold and clever smugglers. There's a very heavy human cost. And our sources bring up a specific figure to anchor this, Fernão Dias Pais. He is remembered in Brazilian tradition as the Emerald Hunter.
Right, and Fernão Dias is a figure of tragic irony, really. He spent his entire life pushing into the sertão, the deep, unforgiving backwoods of Brazil, obsessively searching for emeralds.
Just obsessed.
Yeah, and when he finally died in 1681, he died out there in the wilderness, clutching a handful of green stones that he fully believed were the emeralds he had sacrificed his entire life to find.
But they weren't emeralds.
Yo.
Our sources reveal that those green stones were actually tourmalines. Now, tourmaline is a highly appreciated, beautiful gemstone, especially in Minas Gerais, where it's incredibly abundant, but its true value was completely masked for him because it had the wrong name.
Exactly.
He actually had the treasure in his hands, he just didn't know what to call it.
Yeah, and his son-in-law, Manuel de Borbrigado, actually learned from that exact expedition. He went on to become the superintendent of the Sabra mines, effectively managing the real mineral wealth of the region.
Oh, interesting.
But this raises an important question about how we assess value, not just in gemstones, but in human legacies. Because the ledger of the Bandeirantes, of men like Borbrigado, has a very dark column.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because while they were brilliantly mapping rivers and discovering mineral wealth, these exact same Bandeirantes were leading expeditions that ruthlessly raided Guarani missions.
Yes, they were.
They actively enslaved indigenous people by the thousands to work those very mines. And this isn't just some dusty, forgotten history, Brazil is actively relitigating this right now. You see this massive tug of war happening today. Like, in 2021, protesters in São Paulo actually set fire to a massive monument of Manuel de Borbrigado.
And as we navigate this, our goal is not to validate the monument, nor are we validating the bonfire. We are looking impartially at how modern society is forced to process these deeply conflicting truths.
Exactly. I want to make it clear to you listening that we aren't picking sides here. But it brings up this massive uncomfortable tension for you as a reader of history. Like, how do you reconcile a legacy when a single historical figure is simultaneously a pioneering linguistic genius who physically opened up a continent and also a brutal enslaver?
It's tough.
Is it even possible to hold both of those truths in your head without automatically picking a side?
It is possible, and this is where the discipline of Mamelucology really proves its worth. Our sources introduce a historiographical concept called the Zuozwan discipline, which essentially translates to keeping the full ledger.
Wait, hold on, Zuozwan. I'm completely lost. I saw that in the notes, but what does that actually mean in practical terms?
Right. So the Zuozwan is an ancient Chinese narrative history. It is famous for its uncompromising, objective recording of events, both the glorious and the horrific, without trying to smooth over the contradictions of human nature.
Oh, I see.
So, applied here, the maxims of Mamelucology state two things. Understanding is never an endorsement, and crediting is never an allegiance.
Crediting is never an allegiance. Wow. That completely changes how you look at a historical figure.
Right. An honest historian using this discipline has to credit the geographic audacity, the sheer mastery of the Tupi-Guarani languages, and the logistical genius it took to find the gold that rebuilt Lisbon. But on the exact same page, in the exact same ledger, that historian must mechanically record the raids, the violence, and the captives. You don't erase the linguistic genius to highlight the slavery, and you don't erase the slavery to highlight the exploration. You hold them both as the complete, uncomfortable truth.
It's about not letting the messy complexity of human nature be flattened by whatever our modern political debates happen to be today. You just keep the full ledger.
Exactly.
And what blew my mind in the sources is that this idea of the Mameluco, this bicultural human bridge, isn't just a phenomenon confined to the jungles of South America.
No, not at all. It is a fundamental global mechanism for how civilization transmits itself. To see how this works intellectually rather than geographically, we can shift our focus from the frontiers of Brazil and travel back in time to medieval Europe, specifically to Toledo, Spain.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because I don't know about you, but when I learned about the Renaissance in school, it was always taught as if Europe essentially woke up one day, remembered that the ancient Greeks and Romans existed, and just organically started painting and doing science again.
Yeah, that's the standard narrative.
Right. But our sources detail something called the Toledo translation method. And it shows that the Renaissance wasn't self-generated at all. It was actually imported using a process called proto-Mamelucology.
And that suffix, agum, implies the active, ongoing process of being a cultural bridge.
Got it.
The transmission of knowledge in Toledo wasn't done by solitary monks hunched over dictionaries in a quiet room. Dictionaries for these complex philosophical concepts barely existed. Instead, the translation was a two-stage living chain of human beings.
Okay, can you walk me through the mechanics of that? How did a living chain actually work?
Sure. Picture a room in medieval Toledo. At the center, you have a Mozarab scholar.
A Mozarab.
Right. A Mozarab was an Iberian Christian who had lived for generations under Moorish Islamic rule. So they were entirely immersed in Arabic culture, language, and thought, but retained their European roots. They were the ultimate bicultural bridge.
Wow. Okay.
This scholar would look at a highly complex scientific or philosophical text written in Arabic, and they would read it aloud, translating it on the fly into the local spoken Romance vernacular of the street.
Wait, so they aren't even writing it down yet. They're just speaking it.
Correct. Then, sitting right next to them, a Latin-speaking European scribe would listen to that spoken Romance language and simultaneously write the concepts down in formal Latin.
Oh, man. It's like an API in modern computing.
An API.
Yeah. You had this incredibly valuable raw data in one programming language, Arabic. The Mozarab scholar acts as the interface, parsing it into an intermediate format spoken Romance.
Ah, see.
And then the Latin scribe compiles it into the final output written Latin. It ensures that none of the data is lost across two completely incompatible cultural operating systems.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. The knowledge didn't pass through a static book. It required a bicultural human being to actively decode it.
Right.
This living chain, spearheaded by translators like Gerard of Cremona, is exactly how the lost works of Ptolemy, Avicenna, Averroes, and Aristotle were fed back into the European bloodstream.
Which is huge.
Massive.
Yeah.
This was the intellectual raw material that eventually influenced heavyweights like Thomas Aquinas. Without this mechanism, there is no Renaissance.
And there was a second channel of this happening too, right? Later on.
Yes, a second massive influx of knowledge occurred in 1453.
What happened then?
The Byzantine Empire finally fell. Constantinople was captured by the Ottomans. As a result, a wave of Byzantine scholars fled west to Italy, specifically to Florence, and they physically carried with them the original Greek manuscripts that Western Europe had completely lost access to for centuries.
Wow. So you have these two major channels of knowledge transfer, one flowing through the Moorish territory in Spain via these living translation chains, and one flowing from the fleeing Byzantine scholars into Florence.
Exactly.
The West wrote its own history as if the brilliant light of the Renaissance just naturally clicked on. But it was entirely dependent on these human conduits, these Mamelucos, physically crossing borders to plug them back in.
Because knowledge requires carriers. Without the bicultural human bridge willing to translate and contextualize it, the most brilliant text in the world is just dead ink on a page.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of preservation.
Right.
We've seen how these human bridges transfer knowledge across space, from the jungle to the city, from the Arab world to Europe. But what happens when the bridge isn't between two living cultures, but between a conquered past and a victorious future? Like, how does a civilization preserve its knowledge across time, protecting it against total military conquest?
To answer that, we have to look at the fate of other ancient river valley civilizations and then contrast them with ancient China. Think about the Indus Valley civilization. They were incredibly advanced, they left behind massive planned cities, but their script is entirely dead. We cannot read a single word of it today. Their historical record died the moment their last reader died.
That is so haunting. The same thing happened to ancient Egypt, didn't it? Like, they had hieroglyphs, this incredibly complex, beautiful system of writing, but that entire system was tied to their religious priesthood.
Exactly. When the priesthood faded, the writing died. The very last hieroglyphic inscription was carved at the Temple of Philae in the year 394 AD.
Wow, 394 AD.
Yeah. After that, 4,000 years of Egyptian history just went silent. It was utterly unreadable until someone randomly stumbled upon the Rosetta Stone centuries later.
Crazy.
And in Mesopotamia, nestled between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, you had cuneiform. But every time a new regime swept in and conquered the territory, whether it was the Babylonians or the Persians, they systematically replaced the script and the system of the previous rulers. The cultural continuity was repeatedly, violently shattered.
So why was China different? Because at first glance in our sources, it looks like it was just a geographical advantage.
Right.
Like, China had the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, and they were fortified by these massive natural walls. You have the unforgiving Gobi Desert to the west, immense mountain ranges to the southwest, and the Pacific Ocean to the east. Seems like geography just bought them incredible amounts of time to develop their culture undisturbed.
Geography certainly bought them time early on, but here is the critical pivot. Those geographic walls were eventually breached. Repeatedly.
Right.
The Mongols swept down from the northern steppe and took absolutely everything. Later, the Manchus conquered the entire territory. China was completely subjugated and ruled by outside foreign forces.
So what does this all mean? If they were violently conquered, just like Mesopotamia was, why didn't their culture get erased and replaced by the Mongols or the Manchus? How did they survive?
Because of what our sources call the ultimate conscience infrastructure, the
Yeah.
Kiju, the civil service examinations.
The exams.
Yes. Both the Mongol conquerors, the Yuan dynasty, and the Manchu conquerors, the Qing dynasty, did something remarkable upon taking the throne. They didn't destroy the system. They kept the examination system intact. They kept the court historians employed. They kept the Chinese script exactly as it was.
Wait, so the conquerors were absorbed by the very system they conquered?
It was a brilliant, self-sustaining cultural trap.
Wow.
Yeah, the Mongols actually restored the exams in 1315, and the Manchus ran those exact same civil service exams all the way until 1905. They even meticulously compiled the dynastic histories of the previous rulers in the traditional Chinese format.
But how mechanically did an exam act as a trap? Like, why would a victorious Mongol emperor care about a Chinese civil service test?
Because to govern a vast, complex apparatus like China, you need millions of literate, highly organized bureaucrats. You cannot run the empire with cavalry alone.
Ah, that makes sense.
To get the bureaucrats, the conquerors needed to use the existing exams. And to understand why the exams were so potent, you have to look at what was on them. During the ancient Zhou dynasty, they replaced the extreme cruelty of the previous Shang dynasty with strict moral and ethical codes.
Okay.
Later, Confucius authenticated these codes. He famously claimed he wasn't inventing anything new, calling his work mere transmission of the ancient wisdom.
I see. Because the Kiju, the exam system, made reading and mastering these specific Confucian classics the absolute only road to political power, wealth, and social status. It created a massive perpetual incentive structure.
Exactly.
If a bureaucrat wanted a job under the Mongol emperor, they still had to memorize the ancient Chinese codes.
Right. For 13 centuries, millions of ambitious men across every single generation had to learn to read those exact Zhou codes perfectly. They had to keep the script legible. That is the fundamental difference between a culture that leaves behind beautiful ruins and a civilization. A civilization maintains a living readership.
The mountains and the deserts guarded the physical body of the nation, but the examination system guarded its soul. It carried this concept, what our sources call liangxian, or conscience unbroken through the centuries.
That's a great way to put it.
The conquerors realized they needed the bureaucrats. But to pass the exams, those bureaucrats had to study the conscience of a conquered culture. The zoo codes survived, not because they were carved in stone, but because they were constantly, obsessively being read.
What all of these sources fundamentally tell us is that history does not survive in a vacuum. It doesn't survive just because someone wrote it down on a scroll or saved it to a hard drive. It survives only when there is a bicultural bridge, a Mameluco willing to translate it, or living readership required to carry it forward.
It all comes back to the human element, the human infrastructure. We started today looking at the Santos do Cao Oco, the hollow saints stuffed with smuggled gold in the Brazilian jungle. We looked at Fernão Dias clutching tourmalines he thought were emeralds, holding true value but the wrong name.
Yes, we covered a lot of ground.
We did. We saw the Mozarab scholars in Toledo acting as living APIs to spark the Renaissance. And finally, the impenetrable exam halls of China, where a conquered people turned their own conquerors into the custodians of their culture. And by taking this deep dive today, by listening to this and turning these historical concepts over in your mind, you are actively participating in that exact same transmission. You are the living readership right now.
Which leaves us with a highly critical, perhaps uncomfortable question to consider about our own era.
Oh.
Today, in our modern digital age, we generate more data in a single day than the entire Byzantine Empire produced in a century. But if our modern digital empire were to suddenly fall, what is our equivalent of the Kiju?
Oh man, that is a terrifying thought. If the power goes out, who reads the code?
Exactly. Where are our Toledo translators for the digital age? Are we actually building a resilient conscience infrastructure that will force the future to understand us, to read our ledgers? Or are our massive climate-controlled cloud servers just another unreadable Indus Valley script waiting to happen, a mountain of data with no living readers?
It brings us right back to that opening question. Who really writes history? It isn't the kings and it isn't the conquerors. It's the people who ensure the next generation knows how to read the ledger. Keep diving deep, keep questioning the infrastructure around you, and we'll catch you next time.